All right. Shalom, family. It's your brother Kanaiba coming at you once again with this video titled Bacchus, Bacchanalian Rites, White Parties on the Left-Hand Side, ? Okay, so if you've seen my previous video, I did a video titled The Only White Party That Actually Matters, in which I dealt with basically the concept of a white party on the right-hand side. And in that video, I stated that my next video would be dealing with white parties on the left-hand side. So that's what we're going to get into today. So we're going to be dealing with the concept of the Bacchus. Okay. Now, the Bacchus is a pagan god that goes back to ancient Rome. Okay. He's a pagan god of the ancient Roman culture, right? And actually goes back a little farther than that, back to the ancient Greeks. But in the Greek culture, he went under the name of Dionysus. But it's basically the same pagan entity, Dionysus and the Bacchus, okay? But it's all dealing with that Greco-Roman culture, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to deal with this concept of the Bacchus or Dionysus, okay? Because what you have to understand that this is America, okay? America is the resurrection of ancient Rome, correct? According to the scriptures. So if America is the resurrection of ancient Rome, do not marvel if you see a lot of the same practices of ancient Rome done here in America. Okay? And when you look at these white parties that Diddy basically conducts, it's all a ritual that goes back to ancient Rome, dealing with the Bacchanalian rites. And this is just my critique. I could be wrong, but that's the way I see it. Okay? And like I said in my previous video, make no mistake about it, Diddy is not the only one that does these white parties. Okay? It's just that he is the one that the elites has chosen to be the face of this particular ritual. Okay, for whatever reason. And the reason being, or the reason could be, that this could all really be a part of the plan. Okay, because, and this is just my critique, but they want us to get comfortable with a lot of these ancient rituals of old. Okay, they want us to get comfortable with it. So they have to put it out there. They have to first put it out there, and there's going to be backlash. There's going to be resistance at first. It's no different from the quote unquote homosexual agenda that's out there. At first, people were against it, but now, as we get further along, unfortunately, people are becoming more comfortable with it. It's no different from this. Soon they want us to get comfortable with these different Bacchanalian rites and a lot of the different rituals of the mystery school systems of old. Okay? And I believe they've chosen Diddy to further this along, so to speak. But he's not the only one that does these white parties. Okay? How is Diddy any different from Hugh Hefner? Hugh Hefner was basically doing the same thing. Okay? But with all that being said, okay, we're going to actually give the foundation. The scriptures are going to be our foundation. We're going to start off with the scriptures. Okay? Then we're going to work our way up to basically talking about Diddy. Okay? But we got to lay the foundation first. So with that being said, let's get into it. Okay? So we're going to start with Revelation chapter 13 and verse 12. Now, when you read Revelation chapter 13, there's really two beasts that are talked about in this chapter. Now, this is the second beast that's being referred to. And that second beast, of course, is America. But America is going to have a lot of the attributes of the first beast. The first beast being what? The ancient Roman Empire. Okay, so let's read the verse. This is Revelation chapter 13 and verse 12, and it reads, it says, and he, which is America, exercised all the power of the first beast before him. The first beast before America is dealing with ancient Rome. It says, and causeth the earth and them which dwell therein to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed. What is the deadly wound that Rome had? Of course, Rome fell. Okay, but that deadly wound is healed through America. America is the resurrection of ancient Rome. Okay, but it says that this particular beast, America, exercises all the power of that first beast, which is ancient Rome. But the key here, it says, and causeth the earth and them which dwell therein to worship the first beast. So like I said earlier, if this be the case, do not marvel if you see a lot of the ancient practices of ancient Rome, a lot of those pagan practices of ancient Rome. Do not marvel if you see them being done here in America, because America is the resurrection of ancient Rome. America is causing everybody to worship ancient Rome. A lot of those practices and things of that nature. Okay, just to give you an example of the more obvious ones. Every year on so-called New Year's, which is what? January 1st. You celebrate January 1st. All January 1st is the veneration of the Roman god Janus. January 1st is really not the new year, but you're secretly worshiping the pagan Roman god Janus. Okay. Fast forward to February the 14th, so-called Valentine's Day. That goes back to ancient Rome as well, known as the Lupercalia. Okay, which is going into paganism. Okay, then if you fast forward to really March, April, May, and June is dealing with goddesses, going back to the Greco-Roman Empire. Okay, June going into the Roman goddess Juno. Okay, then of course, even looking at Christmas, that's going into Sol Invictus. This is going back to ancient Rome. Okay, so again, you're already doing it, but those are the more obvious ones. But you have to understand that back in ancient Rome, they had different festivals that were actually more secret. And that's going into the Bacchanalian rites, which we're going to get into. Okay. All right. So moving forward, let's get a little bit more information on the Bacchus. Okay. So here's some information on the Roman god Bacchus. And it reads, it says Bacchus was the Roman god of agriculture, wine, and fertility, equivalent to the Greek god Dionysus. Okay, like I told you earlier. It says he is often seen with vines of grapes with him. Okay, because again, he's the so-called god of wine, right? Then it goes on to say Dionysus was said to be the last god to join the 12 Olympians. Then it goes on to say supposedly Hestia gave up her seat for him. His plants were vines and twirling ivy. Okay, so those are some of the symbols that's associated with him. It's the vine and the ivy plant. Okay, and again, this should not this should not surprise you. Even when you look at so-called colleges, they are immersed in Greek culture. That's why one of the base level degrees that you can get is known as what? A bachelor degree, aka a Bacchus degree. Okay, and the most prestigious colleges are known as what? Ivy League schools. Again, it's just going back to the Greco-Roman culture of Dionysus and the Bacchus. Okay, even when you move forward, and I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but when you look at bachelor parties, okay, that's simply a Bacchus party, because a lot of the same rituals are done, okay, when you look at what goes on in a bachelor party and even a bachelorette party, which in my view, a lot of times are worse than bachelor parties. But it all goes back to the Bacchus, okay? But not to get too far off topic, but that's what that's going into, okay? But it goes on to say he carried a pine cone topped staff, and his followers were goat-footed satyrs and maenads. Now, keep that in mind, because we're going to touch on that. That's very important, those maenads. Okay? Now, who are the maenads? It says those are wild women who dance energetically during his festivals. Bacchus is the son of Jupiter. And make no mistake about it, Bacchus, the concept of Bacchus is really going into the character in the Bible known as Nimrod. That's all the Bacchus is Nimrod. And of course, that would mean his father Jupiter is Cush. Cush, Nimrod, Jupiter, Bacchus. Okay, but not to get too far off topic, but that's what that's going into. Okay. So now let's go back to the previous verse that we just read, just to refresh our memory, which is Revelation chapter 13 and verse 12. And it reads, it says, and he exercised all the power of the first beast before him, and caused the earth and them which dwell therein to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed. Now again, since America is the resurrection of ancient Rome, and we just read that the Bacchus is one of the deities that's worshipped in ancient Rome. The Bacchus goes back to ancient Rome, that Greco-Roman era. You should not marvel if you're seeing different festivals and things that are associated with the Bacchus here in America, since the Bacchus goes back to ancient Rome. Okay, so now this is what we're going to do. We're going to stay in the scriptures for just a bit, because we're laying the foundation here. Okay, but what we're going to do is we're going to prove something here. There's a lot of people, they look at the Bible as if it's only a book of faith and a book that's simply spiritual, and which it is. But that's not all the Bible is. The Bible is also a history book. Accurate history, might I add. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to get a bit of history. And we're going to go back to the time of the Maccabees. We're going to look at something here. Okay, so let's go to 2 Maccabees chapter 6, and let's take a look at something here dealing with our people, the Jews, the Israelites. Okay, let's take a look at this. So this is 2 Maccabees chapter 6 and verse 1. Now, what you got to understand, the time of the Maccabees goes back to the ancient Greeks, the time of the Greeks. okay, which was actually slightly before the Roman Empire, okay, but it's still that Greco-Roman Empire, right? This is during the time of the Greeks, right? So this is 2 Maccabees chapter 6 and verse 1, and it reads, it says, not long after this, the king sent an old man of Athens to compel the Jews to depart from the laws of their fathers and not to live after the laws of God. Now, remember I told y'all that that America is really, it's the resurrection of ancient Rome, right? Or that Greco-Roman Empire, but really ancient Rome. Look at what's going on right here. The Jews are being influenced to not keep the laws of God. Is that not the same thing that's going on here in America? Okay, even when you look at the church system here in America, dealing with Christianity, they teach against the laws of God. Why? Because when you look at Christianity, it's just a branch of the Roman Catholic Church, which deals heavily in paganism. But anyway, let's continue. Let's continue. Let's look at the next verse. So this is verse 2, and it reads, it says, and to pollute also the temple in Jerusalem, and to call it the temple of Jupiter Olympius. Hey, didn't we just read that Jupiter is said to be the father of the Bacchus? Okay, did we not just read that? Okay, but let's continue. And that in Gerizim of Jupiter, the defender of strangers, as they did desire that dwelt in the place. Now notice, Jupiter is called the defender of strangers. Isn't it something that when you look at Christianity, one of the main things they harp on is the quote unquote strangers, aka the other nations, also being a part of salvation? Ain't that funny? Well, Jupiter is known as the defender of the strangers, a pagan god. Could it be that concept of all nations actually receiving salvation, could that be dealing with paganism? That whole concept? Something to think about. Okay, but I just found it strange that Jupiter is known as the defender of the strangers. Okay, but anyway, let's move forward. So this is verse 3, and it reads, it says, the coming of this mischief was sore and grievous to the people. Okay, again, the Jews are people being presented with this Greek culture. Ultimately, you're going to see that it's being forced upon our ancestors as we continue reading. Okay, so let's continue. Let's look at verse 4 here. So this is verse 4, and it reads, it says, for the temple was filled with riot and reveling by the Gentiles, who dallied with harlots and had to do with women within the circuit of the holy places, and besides that brought things that were not lawful. So there was a lot of reveling and riot that was going on in the temple. These quote unquote wild parties. Okay, emphasis on wild parties. These types of things the Gentiles or the Greeks were doing in the temple. Our temple was being profaned. Okay, it said they dallied with harlots. Harlots were being dealt with in the temple. I want you to picture this. Okay, it says, and had to do with women within the circuits of the holy places, and besides that brought in things that were not lawful. So let's continue. Let's get a little bit more information about that. Let's look at the next verse. So this is verse 5, and it reads, it says, the altar also was filled with profane things, which the law forbiddeth. Okay, pretty self-explanatory, right? Let's look at the next verse. So this is verse 6, and it reads, it says, neither was it lawful for a man to keep Sabbath days or ancient feasts. Now watch closely. Or to profess himself at all to be a Jew. That's why I said this Greek culture was being forced onto our people. Okay? And just look at the end of that verse. It says it got to a point where you couldn't even refer to yourself as a Jew, actually being a Jew. Okay? So they weren't allowed to call themselves what they were, which were Jews. And they were having Greek culture forced on them. So over time, our ancestors, they stopped calling themselves Jews and started referring to themselves as Greeks. Now it should make more sense of what Paul meant in the book of Galatians chapter 3 when he said that there's no difference between the Jew or the Greek. That's the history behind what Paul meant. He wasn't talking about actual ethnic Greeks. He was still talking about our people, the Jews. There's no difference between them because you're the same people. Ethnically, you're the same people. It's just that these people calling themselves Greeks, there's a reason you're calling yourself Greek, because you assimilated into Greek culture. That's the history behind that. Okay, but again, not to get too far off topic, but again, that's why I said Christianity, they quote these verses, not knowing that there's a history behind a lot of the things that Paul said. And we're reading that history behind the difference between Jew and Greek. That particular verse. There's no difference between Jew nor Greek. This is what Paul is referring to. Okay. It's got a little sidetracked, not to get too far off topic, but that's what that's going into. Okay. But anyway, let's look at the next verse. So this is verse 7, and it reads, it says, and in the day of the king's birth, every month they were brought by bitter constraint to eat of the sacrifices. So there were basically foods that were being sacrificed to idols that were actually in the temple. Okay. And our ancestors were made to eat those things. That's why when you look at, go in the Bible and look at what's known or called the New Testament, that's why it's always spoken against eating foods that are sacrificed to idols. Okay, that's why when you go to the book of Revelation, Yahweh Shai, whom the world knows as Jesus Christ, he called out one of the 7 churches that's talked about in the book of Revelation. He called one of those 7 churches out because they were still eating foods that were sacrificed to idols. Okay, that's a big no-no. Right? So we're reading about what was going on during the time of the Maccabees, during the time of the Greeks. Okay. Let me start from the top again. It says, and in the day of the king's birth, every month they were brought by bitter constraint to eat of the sacrifices. Now watch closely. Here's the point. It says, and when the fast of Bacchus was kept, the Jews were compelled to go in procession to Bacchus, carrying ivy. We already read that the ivy plant is the symbol of the Bacchus. Did we not? Okay, so this is not some made up thing. Okay, when you go back to that Greco-Roman culture, there were really false deities known as the Bacchus or Dionysus in Greek culture. Now remember, I told you the Bible is accurate history. So one may look at this and say, well, why is this deity being called the Bacchus when the Bacchus goes back to Rome? And this is during the time of the Greeks. Well, when you actually read this in older translations or other translations like the GNT, the Good News Translation, it doesn't say Bacchus. It actually says Dionysus. Okay. And actually, when you go back up to verse 2, remember we read about Jupiter, and the GNT, it doesn't say Jupiter, it says Zeus, because Zeus is the father of Dionysus. Okay. So again, the Bible is accurate history. Okay. But we went through all of that to give a history about the Bacchus, and it even goes back dealing with our people. Okay, so we see here something called the Fast of Bacchus. Let's do a quick Google search on what's known as the Fast of Bacchus. Okay, so here is a quick Google search, and I typed in the Fast of Bacchus. Okay, and here's what came up, and it reads. It says the Fast of Bacchus was a festival that was part of the Bacchanalia. It says a series of celebrations of the Roman god Bacchus, or Dionysus, the Greek god of wine and festivity. So now, let's actually keep reading. Let's look at the origin. Okay, let's see what it says. It says the worship of Dionysus and the Bacchanalia originated in southern Italy and were brought to Rome by Greek settlements. Okay, let's scroll up a bit here. So now let's read the description. It says the Bacchanalia were wild, secretive festivals that involved drinking, singing, dancing, and other rowdy activities. The festivals were known for the mixing of classes and genders, which went against traditional social and moral norms. Is that not what we're seeing here today in America? Okay. Just on a basic level. Okay, a lot of the stuff we see going on in society goes against traditional social and moral norms. Okay, so how much more these secret parties that's starting to be exposed in the media, such as these Diddy white parties. Okay, everything we just read in the description sounds a lot like these white parties that, Diddy is going down for. Does it not? Okay, because again, America is the resurrection of ancient Rome. That's why I said, do not marvel when you see these types of things. Okay, it's just a fulfillment of scripture. Okay, but anyway, let's move forward. Roman response. It says the Roman state viewed the Bacchanalia as subversive and made celebrating them a capital offense. It says in 186 BC, the Senate passed legislation to reform the Bacchanalia, attempting to control their size, organization, and priesthoods. Okay, so now let's scroll up a little bit more and let's read about the Jewish involvement. Okay, now we're getting into it. So let's scroll up a bit more here and let's read the Jewish involvement. And it reads, it says the Bible describes how the Jews were forced to participate in the Bacchanalia, including carrying ivy in procession to Bacchus. Okay, now we just read that. What this article is referring to 2 Maccabees chapter 6. We just read that. Okay. It goes on to say what? Plutarch, which I believe Plutarch was a Greek historian, right? It says also mentions a Bacchanalian festival celebrated by the Jews. It says where they carried fig branches and ivy-adorned sticks into the temple. Okay, because again, we already read the history where the Greeks were forcing Greek culture upon the Jews. Okay, and a lot of Jews assimilated, unfortunately. This is why fast forward in history to the Roman Empire. That's why Paul was saying things like, there's no difference between the Jew nor the Greek. Okay, referring to those Greeks who were trying to repent and come back to the Commonwealth of Israel. Okay, those particular Greeks were actually Jews, or what's known in antiquity as Hellenistic Jews. Okay, so now let's actually move forward and let's look at some ancient depictions of the Bacchus. Okay, let's take a look at this. So looking at this particular painting, this is a painting known as the Bacchus, and it was painted in the year 1596 by the Italian painter known as Michelangelo Caravaggio. Okay, so this is back in 1596. Okay, but again, you see him holding the glass of wine because this is what he's known for, right? And of course, he has the ivy plant as a headpiece, right? But notice what the garment is. He's wearing white. Okay, now could this be a correlation to the white parties? Who knows? But it's just, very curious, so to speak. Okay, let's get another depiction. So this is another painting that was done in the year 1894 by a French painter whose name was William Bouguereau. Okay, and as we see here, of course, she has the ivy plant on top of her head, and she has the pine cone topped staff that we read about that's associated with the Bacchus. Okay, but she is not the Bacchus. She's a priestess of the Bacchus. Okay, and of course, again, we see she's adorned in white. Okay, now could this be a correlation? Who knows? But again, it's curious. Okay, so let's move forward. So now we have one more painting, and really it's two paintings combined. Okay, and to the right, you have what's known as the Women of Amphissa. Okay, that's the name of that particular painting, right? And to the left is another painting known as the Priestess of Bacchus, similar to the one we just saw. Okay, now, of course, both of these paintings were done in the 19th century or the 1800s, right? But again, notice they're all wearing white. And notice the leopard print. Okay, which is, again, there's something else that's associated with the Bacchus. Keep that in mind. We're going to be touching on that later in this series. Okay, but again, what I want to put more focus on is the right of this painting. All of those particular women, in my view, are probably what we read earlier, Maenads or Bacchanets. Okay, so what I'm probably going to do is I'm probably going to end it here, and I'm going to make this part 1. Okay, and what we'll do, we'll pick back up right here in this particular spot in part 2 and go from there. Okay, because I don't want to make this too lengthy, so hopefully it'll only be broken up into 2 parts. Okay, but I feel like this is a good place to break it up and end it with part 1. Okay, so with that, and as always, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to the Most High Yahweh, which is the name of the Heavenly Father, and I do so by Hashem, which means in the name of Yahweh Shai. which is the name of the only begotten Son of the Heavenly Father, whom the world knows as Jesus Christ. And I want to thank all you brothers and sisters for tuning in. I hope this video was informative and edifying. And until next time, Shalom family, and I'll see you in part 2.